Welcome to the Life Paradox, where reality is stranger than fiction. She found an old diary in her attic. What she read changed her whole family's future, Part 1. The discovery Eleanor Miller had never liked attics. There was something about their stale air and forgotten possessions that made her uncomfortable, as if the past itself was watching her from the shadows. But today, with boxes scattered across the dusty floorboards of her grandmother's Victorian home, she had no choice but to face those feelings. 3 weeks had passed since Grandma Rose's funeral. At 87, Rose Bennett had lived a remarkably long and quiet life, leaving behind a house full of memories and mysteries that now fell to Eleanor to sort through. The task seemed impossible, especially with the impending sale of the property looming just 2 months away. How does someone collect so much in one lifetime? Eleanor muttered to herself, brushing cobwebs from her auburn hair. The late afternoon, sun filtered through a small round window, illuminating dancing dust particles in golden light. Her fingers traced the edge of another cardboard box, this one different from the others. Smaller, with delicate floral designs faded nearly to invisibility. When she lifted the lid, the scent of aged paper and dried lavender escaped like a ghost. Inside lay a leather-bound book, its cover cracked with age, but surprisingly well-preserved. Eleanor lifted it carefully, noting its substantial weight. No dust came off in her hands. Unlike everything else in the attic, this book had been protected, cherished. Eleanor settled cross-legged on the wooden floor, the diary balanced on her lap. The binding creaked as she opened to the first page, revealing handwriting that wasn't her grandmother's familiar script. April 3rd, 1946. They say the war is over, but some wars never end. What we've done follows us home like shadows at dusk. I write these words not for absolution, but as testimony. Someone should know the truth, even if I'm long gone when they find it. Eleanor's heart quickened. The date placed these writings just after World War II. But whose memories were these? Her grandmother would have been only a young girl then. She flipped through several pages, scanning dates and snippets. The entries spanned nearly 2 years, ending abruptly in January 1948. The handwriting grew increasingly erratic. Toward the end, as if written by someone in distress or failing health. Her phone buzzed with a text from her husband. Dinner in 20 minutes. Bringing home Italian. Eleanor sighed, reluctantly closing the diary. As she did, a faded photograph slipped from between the pages, floating to the floor like an autumn leaf. She reached for it, turning it over to reveal 4 young people. 3, men and 1 woman, standing before what appeared to be a research facility. Their smiles seemed forced, and something in their eyes suggested unease despite the casual pose. On the back, written in the same handwriting as the diary, were 4 names and a date: Thomas, Vincent, Clara, and James. Alamogordo, 1945. None of these names belonged to anyone in her family, at least no one she'd ever heard mentioned. Every paradox begins with a question. If you love unraveling life's biggest mysteries, hit subscribe and join the Life Paradox, where every story bends reality. Eleanor carefully returned the photograph to the diary and placed both in her tote bag. Something told her this wasn't just another family keepsake to be sorted and discarded. The weight of the diary seemed to pulse against her side as she descended the attic stairs, as if it carried a heartbeat of its own. Secrets longing to be discovered after decades of silence. Little did she know that by nightfall, everything she believed about her family would begin to unravel. That night, after tucking her 10-year-old daughter Madison into bed, Eleanor settled into the worn leather armchair by the living room window. Rain tapped gently against the glass, creating a soothing rhythm that contrasted with her mounting anxiety. The diary sat on her lap, its presence somehow more commanding in the quiet of night than it had been in the attic's dusty confines. Her husband Daniel was working late again, something about quarter-end reports that couldn't wait. Their marriage had grown distant over the past year, conversations reduced to logistics and parenting schedules. Perhaps that's why Eleanor felt drawn to this mystery. It offered escape from the hollow routines that had come to define her life. She opened the diary again, this time with purpose. The handwriting belonged to someone named James Bennett, a name that matched one from the photograph but carried her grandmother's surname. Yet Grandma Rose had never mentioned any James in the tea. Family, April 10th, 1946, nightmares again. Always the same. The flash, the wave of heat, faces melting like candle wax. Clara says writing might help, that confronting the memories could tame them. I'm not convinced, but what else can I try? The government doctors offer pills that only dull everything. I don't want to forget. I need to remember enough to understand what we did. Eleanor's breath caught. The entries continued, describing a scientist's growing moral conflict over his participation in what could only be the Manhattan Project, the development of the atomic bomb. May 2nd, 1946. Thomas visited today. He looks worse than when I last saw him. Thinner, eyes hollow. He says Vincent disappeared 3 weeks ago. No note, no warning. His laboratory was found ransacked. Thomas thinks it wasn't voluntary. I told him he's being paranoid, but I've started checking. Over my shoulder, too. The Russians would pay handsomely for what we know. Eleanor reached for her phone, searching Manhattan Project scientists and skimming through articles. No James Bennett appeared in any of the official records or famous photographs. If he had been there, he had remained in the shadows of history. She continued reading, piecing together a narrative of 4 friends, James, Clara, Thomas, and Vincent, brilliant scientists bound by their work on the most devastating weapon of the 20th century, then haunted by its consequences. By midnight, Eleanor had reached entries from September 1946. James had fallen in love with Clara, their romance blossoming amid shared trauma and guilt. But there was something else. References to a separate research project, something James called redemption work that he pursued in secret. September 18th, 1946. Clara and I have decided to marry next month. No grand ceremony, just papers signed and vows exchanged. We've agreed to leave the past behind, change our names, start fresh where no one knows what our minds created. The work continues in the basement laboratory. If I'm right about the theoretical applications, it could change everything. Not just energy production, but time itself. Vincent's equations were the missing piece. I wonder if that's why they took him. Eleanor's hands trembled. Clara. Could this be Rose? Had her grandmother's name actually been Clara? And if James Bennett had married her, why had Eleanor never heard of her grandfather? Family lore held that Rose had been widowed young, raising Eleanor's mother alone, but details had always been scarce. A soft creak on the stairs startled her. Madison stood in the doorway, hair tousled from sleep. I had a bad dream, Mom, she whispered. Eleanor closed the diary and opened her arms. As her daughter curled against her chest, Eleanor gazed down at the leather cover with newfound apprehension. If James was her grandfather, and if he had truly worked on the Manhattan Project, what other secrets might be hidden within these pages? And, more disturbingly, if her grandparents had changed their identities, who had they been running from? What had happened to Thomas and Vincent? The diary's weight against her lap now felt like a stone, one that, once overturned, might reveal something far darker than she was prepared to face. Morning light streamed through kitchen windows as Eleanor prepared breakfast, her mind still tangled in last night's revelations. Madison chatted animatedly about school, while Daniel moved silently around them, his attention fixed on his phone. In the daylight, the diary's contents seemed almost dreamlike, too fantastic to be real. I'm thinking of visiting Grandma's house again today, Eleanor announced, sliding a plate of scrambled eggs toward Madison. Daniel glanced up. Didn't you just go yesterday? The realtor needs those papers signed, Elle. We can't keep delaying. No, but... She hesitated. How could she explain? I found something. A diary. I think it belonged to my grandfather. This caught Daniel's attention. The grandfather no one talks about? I thought he died before you were born. That's what Mom always said. But this diary, it suggests something different. Eleanor chose her words carefully, aware of Madison's curious eyes. I just want to check a few things at the house. Daniel's expression softened slightly. Fine, but we need those papers by Friday. After dropping Madison at school, Eleanor drove to Rose's Victorian home. The property felt different now, less a collection of antiques and memories, more a vault of secrets waiting to be decoded. The diary mentioned a basement laboratory. Eleanor had never seen anything resembling a lab in her grandmother's house. But there was a basement, a space Rose had always kept locked, claiming it was prone to flooding and unsafe. Eleanor had never questioned this explanation. The basement door stood at the end of the hallway, a heavy oak barrier with an unusual lock. Not the standard hardware store variety, but something custom-made, with a complicated mechanism that had always been secured with a padlock as well. Today, Eleanor came prepared. Among Rose's personal effects had been a small brass key on a lavender ribbon. She had assumed it belonged to a jewelry box, but its unusual teeth had always puzzled. The key slid into the lock with perfect precision. The mechanism turned with surprising ease for something so apparently unused. When Eleanor pushed against the door, it swung open silently on well-oiled hinges. Not the action of a neglected, flood-prone space. A light switch on the wall illuminated, a staircase descending into darkness. Eleanor's heart pounded as she took the first step down, then another. The air grew cooler but not damp, no sign of the flooding her grandmother had warned about. At the bottom, another switch activated overhead fluorescent lights, revealing what Eleanor could only describe as a perfectly preserved time capsule. From the late 1940s, glass-fronted cabinets lined one wall, filled with equipment she couldn't identify. A massive workbench dominated the center of the room, its surface clean but marked with chemical stains and burn patterns. Filing cabinets stood in military precision along another wall. Oh my God, Eleanor whispered to the empty room. The diary hadn't lied. This was indeed a laboratory, maintained and protected for decades behind a locked door and her grandmother's careful misdirection. Eleanor moved slowly around the space, afraid to touch anything yet desperate to understand. Equations covered. A large chalkboard, complex mathematical formulas that meant nothing to her. Beside them, what looked like atomic structures drawn in colored chalk, interconnected with arrows and annotations. A photograph in a simple frame caught her eye. It showed James and Clara, unmistakably a younger version of Grandma Rose, on their wedding day. Clara's eyes shone with happiness that Eleanor had rarely seen in her grandmother. Beneath the workbench, Eleanor discovered a safe, its dial gleaming, as if recently polished. Without the combination, it remained tantalizingly out of reach. She continued her exploration, opening drawers filled with notebooks, each labeled by date. The most recent bore a date just 3 months before Rose's death. Whatever James Bennet had started, Rose had continued, for decades, in secret, beneath the floorboards of her ordinary-seeming life. Eleanor reached for one of the notebooks when her phone rang, startling her. The caller ID showed an unfamiliar number. "Hello?" she answered hesitantly. "Is this Eleanor Miller?" a man's voice asked, professional but with an edge of urgency. "Yes." "Who's this?" "My name is Dr. Andrew Carter. I was a colleague of your grandmother's. I've been trying to reach you since the funeral." A pause. "Mrs. Miller, it's crucial we meet immediately. Rose left something in my care, something she wanted you to have when the time was right." Eleanor's gaze traveled around the laboratory, her free hand clutching one of the notebooks. "How did you know my grandmother?" "We worked together for 30 years, he replied carefully, "on matters that began with your grandfather's research. Please, can you meet me today? It concerns your family's safety." 2 hours later, Eleanor sat across from Dr. Andrew Carter in a quiet corner of a university cafe. He was older than she had expected, well into his 70s, with alert blue eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses and hands that moved with purposeful precision as he spoke. "Rose was one of the finest minds I've ever known," Carter said, stirring his tea methodically. "Few people understood the true scope of her work." "Which was what, exactly?" Eleanor asked, her voice lowered despite the relative privacy. "The diary I found suggests my grandfather worked on the Manhattan Project, but his name doesn't appear in any records." Carter's lips tightened. James Bennett was brilliant, perhaps too brilliant. After Hiroshima and Nagasaki, many scientists struggled with what they'd helped create. Some turned to alcohol, others to religion. James turned to theoretical physics, specifically attempting to undo what he saw as humanity's gravest mistake. Undo? How? Time variance. Carter glanced around before continuing. He believed that targeted energy pulses could create localized temporal fields, pockets where time functioned differently. The theory was decades ahead of anything being discussed openly. Eleanor struggled to process this. "Are you saying my grandfather was trying to build a time machine?" "Not exactly. More like attempting to create a way to send messages or small objects backward through time. He thought if he could warn the scientific community about the long-term consequences of nuclear weapons, history might take a different path." Carter's expression grew somber, but such research attracted unwanted attention from both government agencies and foreign interests. Eleanor thought of the diary entries. Vincent disappeared. Carter nodded grimly. Vincent Chen was taken by Soviet operatives in 1946. Thomas Whalen died in what was officially ruled a laboratory accident in 1947. Your grandparents recognized the pattern and disappeared before they could become the next victims. They changed their names, moved frequently, abandoned their former lives entirely. But the basement laboratory, James couldn't abandon his work. He believed too strongly in its potential. Rose continued it after his death in 1968. Eleanor's head spun. "My mother never mentioned any of this." "Did she know?" Rose protected her daughter by keeping her ignorant. The fewer people who knew, the safer everyone remained. Carter reached into his briefcase and withdrew a small wooden box. "This is what Rose entrusted to me. She made me promise to give it to you only after her death, and only if you discovered the diary on your own." The box was simple but beautiful, carved with interlocking geometric patterns. A small brass plate on its lid bore a sequence of numbers, coordinates perhaps, or a mathematical formula. "What is it?" Eleanor asked, not reaching for it yet. "The culmination of 80 years of research, first by James, then by Rose, finally by both of us working together." Carter placed it carefully on the table between them. "It's what they called the causality engine. Theoretical until 5 years ago, when Rose finally solved the quantum stabilization problem." Eleanor stared at the unassuming box. "You're telling me this thing can send messages through time?" "Objects, actually. Small ones. The field can't sustain anything larger than a wedding ring, and only for microseconds. But it's enough." Carter's voice dropped further. "There's something else you should know. 3 days before her death, Rose activated it. She sent something back, to 1945. Eleanor felt a chill despite the cafe's warmth. To what purpose? She never told me. But afterward, she seemed at peace. She said, "It's done. The circle is complete." Carter pushed the box toward Eleanor. "She was absolutely insistent that you should have this. Said you would know what to do with it when the time came." Eleanor didn't touch the box. I'm a high school English teacher, not a physicist. I wouldn't even know how to turn it on. Instructions are inside, and Rose believed you had the necessary intuition. Carter checked his watch and stood abruptly. I'm sorry to cut this short, but I have another appointment. Keep the box safe, Mrs. Miller. There are still people who would kill for this technology. As he turned to leave, Eleanor called after him. Wait, how did you and my grandmother meet? Carter paused, a sad smile crossing his face. I was her student in 1992. She recognized something in me. The same thing she apparently sees in you. He nodded at the box. Trust your instincts, Eleanor. Rose certainly did. After he left, Eleanor sat motionless, her hand hovering over the wooden box that somehow connected her ordinary life to extraordinary possibilities. And dangers she was only beginning to comprehend. Eleanor arrived home to find her mother's car in the driveway, an unexpected visit that couldn't have come at a worse time. The wooden box sat heavily in her purse, its presence like a live coal against her side. Judith Miller had always been a practical woman, pragmatic to the point of coldness. At 65, she remained rigidly self-contained, her emotions as carefully managed as her steel gray bob and tailored clothing. The relationship between mother and daughter had always been strained by things unsaid. Mom, Eleanor greeted her, with forced brightness, entering the kitchen where Judith sat with Madison, helping with homework. I didn't know you were coming by today, Daniel called. He's concerned about you, Judith replied without preamble. Says you've been distracted. Obsessing over something you found at Rose's house? Of course he had. Eleanor felt a flare of irritation toward her husband. I found Grandpa James's diary. The pencil in Judith's hand snapped. For a moment, her carefully composed facade cracked, revealing something Eleanor had rarely seen. Raw fear. Madison, sweetheart. Judith recovered quickly. Why don't you finish your math upstairs? I need to talk to your mother. Once Madison had gone, Judith's voice dropped to an urgent whisper. Where did you find it? In the attic. Along with a photograph of 4 scientists at Alamogordo, Eleanor answered, studying her mother's reaction. I also found the laboratory in the basement. Judith closed her eyes briefly. I told her to clear everything out before she died. Stubborn woman never listened. You knew? All this time? Eleanor felt decades of family dynamics shifting beneath her feet. Why didn't you tell me? Because knowledge is dangerous. Judith hissed. My entire childhood was spent moving from town to town, never staying anywhere longer than 2 years. Always looking over our shoulders, using different names. Do you have any idea what that's like for a child? Eleanor sank into a chair. The man in the diary, James Bennett, he was your father. Until I was 7. Then he died, or disappeared. I was never quite sure. Mother became even more paranoid afterward. Judith's hands trembled slightly. I swore I would give you what I never had. Stability, normalcy, safety. That meant burying the past. Dr. Carter found me today, Eleanor said quietly. He gave me something Grandma Rose left for me. The color drained from Judith's face. Andrew Carter is still alive and involved in this? She reached across the table, gripping Eleanor's wrist. Listen to me very carefully. Whatever he gave you, destroy it. Don't open it, don't examine it. Destroy it and forget any of this happened. Mom, what are you so afraid of? The men who killed my father never stopped looking for his research. Judith's voice shook. 2 years after he died, men broke into our home in Montana. I was 9. Mother grabbed me from bed and we escaped through a tunnel she'd built under the house. As we ran into the woods, I saw the house explode behind us. Eleanor stared in shock. Explode? Mother had rigged it with explosives, just in case. She was always preparing for the worst. Judith laughed bitterly. Normal mothers bake cookies. Mine taught me how to spot surveillance and create new identities. But eventually you settled down. You married Dad, had me. Because Mother finally created something she called insurance, evidence implicating powerful people, stored with instructions to release it if anything happened to us. Judith's eyes darted to the windows. It worked for a while. But after your father died, the surveillance started again. That's why I pushed you to marry Daniel and move across the country. The realization hit Eleanor like a physical blow. You pushed me toward Daniel because of his corporate transfers? To keep us moving? Judith didn't deny it. Safety was all that mattered. What about happiness? What about love? Eleanor fought to keep her voice down. Have you any idea how lonely my marriage has become? Better lonely than dead, Judith snapped. Now, whatever Carter gave you, it's called the causality engine, Eleanor interrupted. And Grandma Rose used it before she died. Judith froze. Used it? That's impossible. It never worked. According to Carter, she solved the final problems. She sent something back to 1945. Eleanor leaned forward. Mom, what if we could use it? Send a warning to James and Clara before Vincent disappeared? Change everything? You sound exactly like her, Judith whispered, her voice laden with both fear and a strange pride. Always believing the impossible might just be difficult, not unattainable. Before Eleanor could respond, the doorbell rang, a short, authoritative buzz that made both women start. Through the frosted glass panels flanking the front door, Eleanor could make out the silhouettes of two men in dark suits. Don't answer it, Judith warned, already moving toward the back door. Get Madison. We need to leave, now. Mom, we can't just… Eleanor. Judith's voice carried the weight of a lifetime of vigilance. Trust me in this, if nothing else. Those men aren't here for a friendly chat. As the doorbell rang again, more insistently this time, Eleanor felt the weight of the wooden box in her purse, and the terrible realization that her mother's paranoia might have been justified all along. They left through the back door, moving swiftly through the neighbor's yard and into the alleyway beyond. Madison, confused but sensing the urgency, followed without complaint, clutching her mother's hand. Judith led them with surprising confidence, navigating the suburban landscape as if she'd mapped escape routes long ago. My car is 3 blocks east, Judith murmured. Stay close to the hedges. Mom, this is insane, Eleanor whispered, even as she complied. We can't just run. Daniel will come home, find us gone. Call him once we're clear. Judith's eyes continuously scanned their surroundings. Tell him to meet us, but not at home. They reached Judith's car without incident. As they pulled away, Eleanor glanced back to see the 2 men emerging from her house, scanning the street with methodical precision. Who are they? Eleanor asked, her arm protectively around Madison in the back seat. Department of Energy, probably, Judith replied, taking a series of random turns. Or private contractors working for someone who wants your grandfather's research. The label changes, the threat remains the same. Madison looked up at her mother with wide eyes. Are we in danger? Eleanor hesitated, torn between honesty and protection. We're just being careful, sweetheart. Sometimes grown-ups need to take precautions. Like Grandma Rose did, Madison said with unexpected certainty. Eleanor stared at her daughter. What do you mean? She showed me her special basement before she got sick. Said I had the gift like her, and that someday I'd understand what that meant. Madison reached into her pocket and withdrew a small brass key identical to the one Eleanor had used to open the basement door. She gave me this. Eleanor exchanged a startled look with her mother, who had gone very still. Madison, Judith said carefully. What else did Grandma Rose tell you? That time isn't a straight line. It's a circle that can touch itself in special places. Madison shrugged, as if repeating something learned by rote, and that when I was older, I'd help finish what Great-Grandpa James started. Eleanor felt a chill run through her. Rose had recognized something in Madison that Eleanor herself had missed, the same intuitive understanding of physics that had defined James Bennett's work. Judith drove them to a small motel on the outskirts of town, paying cash for a room with practiced anonymity. Once inside, Eleanor called Daniel, fabricating a story about a family emergency with her mother, promising details. Later, he sounded concerned but distracted, typical Daniel, always half-focused elsewhere. As Madison dozed on one of the beds, Eleanor finally opened the wooden box. Inside lay a device about the size of a deck of cards, a sleek metal case with a digital interface displaying coordinates and a date-time field. A small compartment on one side appeared designed to hold whatever object was meant to be sent through. Time. Accompanying it was a handwritten note in Rose's elegant script. Eleanor, if you're reading this, you've discovered truths I hoped would remain buried. I'm sorry for the disruption to your life, and for what I must now ask of you. The future depends on the past being altered. What we didn't understand in 1945 has become painfully clear 80 years later. The calculations are set. All that remains is to send the enclosed item with your authorization code. Madison's birthday, written backward. Trust her instincts. The gift runs strong in her. With love across time, Clara Eleanor noticed a small locket nestled in the bottom of the box. When she opened it, she found not photographs, but what appeared to be a microdisc of some kind. Technology that seemed far too advanced for Rose's era. She left instructions, Eleanor told Judith, who watched with undisguised apprehension. And a message signed Clara, not Rose. She always used her real name when writing about important matters, Judith said softly. Said it helped her remember who she truly was. Eleanor examined the device more closely. According to Carter, she already sent something back before she died. Why would she leave this for me to send as well? Because one message wasn't enough, Judith realized, her expression changing as decades of resentment gave way to understanding. She's asking us to complete a sequence, past, present, and future connecting. Madison stirred on the bed, her eyes opening with unnerving clarity. That's what she told me, Grandma. That we all had parts to play. Great-Grandma Clara, you, Mom, and me. Like links in a chain. Eleanor looked between her daughter and mother, feeling the weight of generations of secrets. Whatever Rose, Clara, had set in motion hadn't begun with finding the diary. It had been carefully orchestrated across decades, perhaps even before Eleanor herself was born. What happens if we do this? Eleanor asked, more to herself than anyone. What changes? Everything, Madison answered with certainty. Or nothing. Grandma Rose said both answers were correct. Outside, the sound of tires on gravel brought their conversation to an abrupt halt. Through the thin curtains, they saw headlights sweep across the parking lot. A dark sedan moving slowly, deliberately past each room. They've found us, Judith whispered. Eleanor clutched the device, her mind racing. They could run again, but for how long? And to what end? The pursuit would never stop as long as the technology existed, unless the past changed first. With sudden clarity, Eleanor understood what her grandmother had been trying to accomplish. Not just sending a message back in time, but creating a cascade of changes that would ripple forward through generations. A way to erase the very dangers they now faced by changing decisions made 80 years ago. Madison, Eleanor asked, her voice steady despite her fear. What's your birthday? Written. Backward? The sedan circled the motel parking lot once more, before stopping directly in front of their room. Eleanor's fingers trembled as Madison recited the sequence. 110290002, which Eleanor entered into the device. The interface illuminated with soft blue light, displaying Target, July 16, 1945, Alamogordo, New Mexico. Authorization accepted. What date is that? Eleanor whispered. The Trinity test, Judith answered grimly. The first nuclear detonation. The day everything changed. Eleanor placed the locket into the small compartment. The device hummed softly, building to a high-pitched whine that made her teeth ache. The air around them seemed to waver, like heat rising from summer asphalt. A sharp knock at the door made them all freeze. Department of Energy, called a male voice. We need to speak with you immediately. The device's display flashed. Quantum field stabilizing. Transmission in 5, 4. Another knock, harder this time. Mrs. Miller, we know you have property belonging to the federal government. Open the door now. 3, 2. The door burst open, wood splintering around the lock. 2 men entered, weapons drawn. Behind them stood Dr. Andrew Carter, his expression grim. Eleanor, he said quietly, please don't activate that device. You don't understand what you're doing. 1. A blinding flash filled the room, forcing everyone to shield their eyes. When the light faded, the device in Eleanor's hands had gone dark, its purpose fulfilled. The locket had vanished. You're too late, Eleanor said, her voice stronger than she felt. It's done. Carter shook his head slowly. Rose warned me you might be hasty. That's why she insisted I find you after the transmission to explain what's really happening. What do you mean? Eleanor demanded, positioning herself protectively in front of Madison. You told me she sent something back before she died. She did. But not to stop the Manhattan Project. Carter gestured for the armed men to lower their weapons. Please, let me explain. Over the next hour, as they sat in tense conversation, Carter revealed the truth that had been hidden between the lines of James's diary. The redemption work hadn't been about preventing the atomic bomb. It had been about preventing something far worse. In the original timeline, Carter explained, the Trinity test had unexpected consequences. It created a quantum rupture, a tear in reality that grew slowly, imperceptibly at first. By 1970, the effects became noticeable. By 2020, catastrophic. Eleanor struggled to process this. What kind of effects? Reality, degradation, localized time anomalies. Eventually, complete universal collapse. Carter's voice was matter-of-fact, as if discussing everyday physics. Rose, Clara, wasn't just a scientist's wife. She was the mathematician who first calculated the rupture's existence. So James wasn't trying to prevent the bomb, Eleanor realized. He was trying to fix what the bomb broke, Carter nodded. The diary you found was itself part of a temporal loop, a message from another timeline where things went much worse. That James Bennett sent warnings to his alternate self, creating a parallel reality, this one, where the worst outcomes could be averted. And the men chasing us? Judith asked, still skeptical. The ones who killed my father? Intelligence. Agencies who recognized fragments of the truth, but misunderstood the purpose. Carter sighed heavily. They believed James was developing weapons, not trying to save reality itself. Then what was in the locket? Eleanor asked. What did Grandma Rose, Clara, want sent back? The final calculations, Carter said simply. Data from 80 years of observations, proving which intervention would stabilize the rupture permanently. Information that James needed in 1945 but couldn't possibly have had without living through the aftermath. Madison, who had been silent throughout the explanation, suddenly spoke. The circle is complete now, isn't it? Great-grandpa gets the message, fixes the problem, and we all continue existing. Carter smiled at her with evident respect. Rose was right about you. Yes, that's essentially correct. But if they fixed it in 1945, Eleanor frowned. Why didn't our present change immediately? Because we're part of the loop, Carter explained. We exist in the modification wave's origin point, the one place that remains consciously aware of both timelines. When you fall asleep tonight, you'll wake to a slightly different world, one where the Bennett family lived ordinary, unremarkable lives. No running, Judith murmured, almost to herself. No fear. No basement laboratory, Eleanor added. No diary. Carter nodded. The changes will be subtle for most people. History's broad strokes remain the same. The bombs still fell on Japan. The Cold War still happened. But the quantum fabric beneath reality will be stable. Will we remember any of this? Eleanor asked, looking at Madison. You might have dreams, déjà vu moments, Carter replied. Madison almost certainly will retain more, given her connection to the time-sensitive lineage. The armed men, who had maintained a respectful distance during the explanation, now approached. Dr. Carter, it's time. Carter stood. They're not here to harm you. Their orders are to escort you home and ensure you're comfortable during the transition. By morning, everything will be recalibrated. As they prepared to leave the motel, Eleanor felt a curious mixture of loss and relief. The family legacy she had just discovered would soon fade into dreams and distant memories. Yet the burden of that legacy, the pursuit, the fear, would vanish as well. Madison took her hand, unexpected wisdom in her young eyes. It's okay, Mom. We're still us, just safer now. Eleanor awoke to sunlight streaming through unfamiliar curtains. For a moment, she lay disoriented, fragments of strange dreams clinging to her consciousness. Something about a diary, a basement laboratory, men with guns. But the images dissolved, like morning mist as she became aware of her surroundings. This wasn't her bedroom, at least not the one she remembered. The walls were a soft sage green rather than pale blue, adorned with framed family photographs she didn't recall taking. Beside her, Daniel slept peacefully, his arm draped across her waist with casual intimacy that felt both foreign and achingly familiar. She carefully extricated herself and padded to the window. Outside lay not the suburban neighborhood she expected, but a tree-lined street near what appeared to be a university campus. Confusion washed over her. Had they moved? Was she still dreaming? On the dresser sat her wallet and phone. The driver's license inside confirmed she was still Eleanor Miller, but her occupation read Associate Professor of Literature rather than high school English teacher. Photos on her phone showed her with students, with Madison at what appeared to be academic functions, with Daniel looking at her with unguarded adoration. Morning, Daniel murmured from the bed, his voice warm with affection. You're up early for a Saturday. Eleanor turned, studying her husband's face. The features were the same, but something about his expression was different. More open, more present. Just thinking, she managed. About your mom's birthday dinner tonight? He sat up, running a hand through sleep-tousled hair. I picked up her gift yesterday. It's wrapped and ready. Mom's birthday, Eleanor repeated carefully. Daniel gave her a curious look. You okay? You seem a little lost this morning. Before she could answer, Madison appeared in the doorway, 13 years old, 3 years older than Eleanor remembered, but unmistakably her daughter. Yet this Madison moved with a dancer's grace, her posture confident in a way that seemed both new and entirely natural. Dad, can we go to the bookstore before Grandma's party? I want to get her that poetry collection we saw. Madison's gaze shifted to Eleanor, a flash of something deeper than recognition passing between them. Morning, Mom. Had any interesting dreams? The question sent an inexplicable shiver down Eleanor's spine. Actually, yes, though I can't quite remember them now. Madison nodded as if this were significant. Grandma says that happens sometimes. Important dreams slipping away, when you try to hold them too tightly. Throughout the morning, Eleanor moved through this new life like an actress who hadn't fully memorized her lines, piecing together the reality around her. They lived in a charming craftsman home near the university where she taught American literature. Daniel worked as an architect with his own small firm, not the corporate executive she remembered. Their marriage was solid, affectionate, evidenced by casual touches and inside jokes that seemed to have years of history behind them. And then there was Madison, still her daughter, but this version pursued ballet with dedicated passion and read physics textbooks for pleasure. Occasionally, Eleanor caught Madison watching her with an awareness that seemed impossible for a 13-year-old, as if she understood precisely what was happening. By afternoon, when they drove to Judith's home for the birthday celebration, Eleanor had stopped questioning and simply absorbed. The memories of her previous life hadn't vanished completely, but they'd taken on the quality of a book she'd read long ago, familiar but distinctly separate from her current reality. Judith's house surprised her most of all. Not the modest, suburban home Eleanor remembered, but a sprawling arts and crafts bungalow surrounded by meticulously maintained gardens. Inside, photographs chronicled a life Eleanor didn't recognize, Judith receiving academic awards, traveling to exotic locations, smiling beside a man Eleanor had never seen before. "Mom?" Eleanor questioned softly as they embraced in greeting. Judith held her at arm's length, studying her face. For a heartbeat, something like understanding passed between them. "You look exactly like your grandmother today," Judith said. She always had that same expression when she was trying to solve a puzzle. "Grandma Rose," Eleanor said carefully. "Clara," Judith corrected. "You know she always preferred her real name among family." The birthday dinner proceeded with comfortable familiarity that Eleanor found herself slipping into naturally. The conversation flowed around her. Discussions of books, art, Madison's upcoming dance recital. This Judith laughed more easily, touched more freely, seemed unburdened by the vigilance Eleanor vaguely remembered. After dessert, while Daniel helped clear dishes and Madison showed her latest ballet routine to Judith's husband Robert, Judith led Eleanor to her study. From a desk drawer, she withdrew a small leather-bound book. "I found this while cleaning last week," Judith said, handing it to Eleanor. "It's the only piece of my father's writing that survived. I thought you might like to have it." Eleanor accepted the journal with trembling hands. The leather was worn but well preserved, the pages filled with elegant handwriting she somehow recognized despite never having seen it before. "He was a physicist," Judith explained. "Brilliant but practical. Died when I was in college. Heart attack, very sudden. Sometimes I wonder what he might have accomplished with more time." Eleanor opened to a random page, finding not complex equations or scientific theories, but simple observations about family life. James's pride in his daughter's academic achievements, his love for Clara, his contentment with their ordinary existence. At the very back of the journal, a photograph was carefully preserved. 4 young people standing before what appeared to be a research facility. On the back, written in fading ink, Thomas, Vincent, Clara, and James. Alamogordo, 19. 45. "He was there when they tested the first atomic bomb," Judith said quietly. "Never talked much about it. Said some experiences change a person forever, make them appreciate the simple miracle of existence." Eleanor studied the photograph, a strange sense of déjà vu washing over her. "They look happy." They were, afterward. Dad used to say they witnessed both the most terrible and most wonderful moment of human ingenuity that day. Something about standing at the threshold of what humanity could accomplish, for better or worse. Judith smiled fondly. He became quite the philosopher in his later years. As they rejoined the others, Eleanor watched Madison engaged in animated conversation with Robert about quantum physics, terms flowing effortlessly from the 13-year-old that would have seemed impossible yesterday. When Madison caught her watching, she offered a small, knowing smile. Later that night, as they drove home under a canopy of stars, Eleanor felt the last fragments of her old memories settling into place alongside the new ones, not replacing them, but integrating, creating a more complete picture of who she was and had always been meant to be. "Mom," Madison said softly from the back seat, "did you know that some physicists believe time isn't linear? That past, present, and future all exist simultaneously, and consciousness is just traveling along a predetermined path? Is that what they teach in 8th grade science these days?" Daniel chuckled. Madison shrugged. "I read it somewhere. But I think they're right. Everything that will happen has already happened. We're just experiencing it in sequence." Eleanor met her daughter's eyes in the rearview mirror, recognizing in them the same intuitive understanding that had apparently defined generations of women in her family, not as a burden of dangerous knowledge, but as a gift of perception. "That's an interesting theory," Eleanor replied carefully. "Do you think we can change that path?" "I think sometimes we already have," Madison answered with quiet certainty. "And that's why things feel exactly as they should be." When they arrived home, Eleanor lingered on the porch while Daniel and Madison went inside. She looked up at the night sky, feeling a profound sense of completion. Somewhere across time, decisions had been made, actions taken, sacrifices offered, all flowing toward this moment, this reality where fear had given way to peace. She thought of James and Clara, of the love that had apparently sustained them through an ordinary lifetime rather than an extraordinary one. Of Judith, who had grown up with stability instead of fear. Of her own marriage, now built on genuine connection rather than convenience and necessity. Small changes with profound consequences. A family legacy not of scientific brilliance and danger, but of quiet wisdom and enduring love. As Eleanor finally turned to enter her home, this home she was still getting to know yet somehow had always known, she carried with her the certainty that some mysteries weren't meant to be solved, only appreciated. And some dreams, even those, barely remembered in the light of morning, contained more truth than waking life ever could. Time might indeed be a circle, touching itself in special places. And in that moment, Eleanor understood that she stood at one such intersection, where what had been, what was, and what might have been converged into a single perfect point of existence. She closed the door behind her, stepping fully into the life that had always been waiting, the one she had somehow helped create across the boundaries of time itself.